Welcome to the show. This is Yisrael Live. We're joined this evening by a very special guest, Mr. Jeremy Saltan. He's the head of the Yemina Party's Anglo Forum and was number 16 on the candidates list for the Yemina Party in the last election. So, Jeremy, can you just give us a little bit of background about yourself, to our audience, about your involvement in Israeli politics and sort of how you've got to where you've got to?
Sure. My name is Jeremy Saltan. I was born in Skokie, just outside of Chicago, Illinois. I made Aliyah in 1995, originally to Bet Shemesh. I've been living in Mevaseret Zion since 2006. I'm married to Cheryl, father to Mimi, Mikey, Gabby, and Ellie. I've been involved in Israeli politics for many years. I've worked in pretty much all of the different type of positions you can think of, both as an elected official and as a appointed official. I've worked as an assistant for ministers, Knesset members, faction, and of course working as a party employee. On the municipal side, I've been elected to various positions in regional government and in local government. Currently, I'm sitting in the regional committee of planning and building that's called Harel within the Jerusalem district. My area is very diverse because it has my area where I live, Mevaseret Zion, and then Telstone, which is an ultra-Orthodox Haredi community, Abu Ghosh, which is an Arab community. Within Mevaseret Zion, I sit on the education committees in the city council, education and culture, and also the youth committee. And besides that, I'm also the deputy chairman of the Immigration and Absorption Committee. The Absorption Center in Mevaseret Zion has 1,300 slots, which is the largest out of all of the different absorption centers in the state of Israel. We've had tens of thousands of different immigrants go through those doors through the years, including the last number of years where it was primarily the Ethiopian population that went ahead and went through there as well. I've been involved with Naftali Bennett since 2012 when we had the first primary in the Bayit Yehudi, the Jewish home. I ended up being asked afterwards to lead during the general election campaign the English side of things. And then after the election, I continued with the Anglo Forum over there, and I worked in the subsequent elections we had afterwards. I was part of the foundation of Yemina Chadash, the new right party that was formed when Bennett, Shaked, and others left the Jewish home. And then I went along with them as well when they created the Yemina party. And as you mentioned, in the last Knesset election, I'm actually the only person besides Naftali Bennett and Ayelet Shaked to be a member with them in each one of the 6 Knesset elections. I was always in a non-realistic spot, as we call it. In the last elections, when we were getting 20-something in the polls, I was placed in the 16th position. And, as far as about a week before the election, we were still polling within the range of me possibly entering Knesset. Of course, our Israeli parliament, but as you know, we only ended up winning 7 seats. However, my boss, the leader of my party, Naftali Bennett, is expected on Sunday to be inaugurated as Israel's next prime minister, regardless of that.
So actually, that's a good place to start. Thank you. So a lot of our viewers won't necessarily be all that familiar with Naftali Bennett. They've probably heard the name. They might have heard of the Yemina party. So as you said, you've known Naftali for quite some time. Could you tell us what's his background? What does he stand for?
Sure. Naftali was born to 2 immigrants who came from San Francisco. He comes like myself from an Anglo home, very, very comfortable in the language of English. I'm sure a lot of people who do know him from his Hasbara appearances on international media, whether, most recently we had the last war or last operation and, last round with Gaza, but throughout the last decade, he's been very much on the scene of on either international media or in various events promoting the Israeli cause in English. His background also includes living for a period of time in New York when he was the CEO of a high-tech company. He served in the army for a longer period of time. He was part of the Sayeret Matkal unit, which is the most elite, the top unit within the IDF. He later became an IDF commander. When he left, he went to high-tech. He worked in the States for a while. He ended up selling 3 companies through what we call exits. His first exit was his company sold for $145 million. So again, he had a lot of success, both in the military and then in private business. And then he had his first involvement in Israeli politics when he served as chief of staff to then opposition leader Benjamin Netanyahu during his time in the opposition from 2006 till 2008. Afterwards, he took on the position of being the chairman of the Yesha Council, the Council of the Settlers in Judea and Samaria. And he had that position for a few years as well, until afterwards, like I said, going into politics, winning the primary for the Jewish Home Party, which is the predecessor was the National Religious Party, the Party of Religious Zionists, and he won that with 2/3 of the vote in his first election. He was reelected by larger majorities in the subsequent primaries that he went through. He served in various ministerial appointments, whether it was economy minister, education minister, and his last post was, of course, defense minister, which is viewed by many as the most important ministry within the Israeli cabinet. And then in the last elections, he ran as a candidate for prime minister. And that brings us to the formation of the government that we've put together through the various coalition agreements. And assuming everything goes well in the vote of confidence on Sunday, he will then move in the following day on Monday to the prime minister's residence.
Thank you. Does he bring something that maybe other political leaders don't have to the table?
Yeah,
What would you say that is?
I would say it's, this comes from, I guess, having a high-tech background and also perhaps his American background as well, growing up in a home of American immigrants. He's an outside-of-the-box thinker. He's a person who has a lot of creativity. He's also a very brilliant multitasker. These are just some of the characteristics that really put him aside from a majority of the Israeli politicians that we're accustomed to. He'll be the first Israeli prime minister who is not, born in Europe or born in Israel to parents who immigrated from Europe. This is, a different type of philosophy, a different type of prime minister. And of course, another symbolic thing is that he's the first religious prime minister. Of course, like myself, he wears one of these kippas, one of these yarmulkes. And that would make him, if you're looking historically, the first religious leader of the Jewish people in the Jewish land since the time of the Second Temple. So, there's also some significance there as well, which I believe has been overlooked by a lot of the analyst pieces that you might have seen in terms of the various profiles.
Yeah, that's certainly the first time I've heard that mentioned by any commentator. How do you think that will be viewed? The fact that he's a religious Jew, how do you think that will be viewed in Europe and America?
I think again, you'll have the people who don't like him will add that to the list of why they don't like him. People who do like him will add that to the list of why it is that they do like him. I think again, for myself as someone who is a man of religion, that breaks a glass ceiling. That shows for religious people who do choose to be a part of Israeli society that there is no limit. You can really you're able to achieve anything and everything. So I really do think that is a very, very big accomplishment. And like I said, as usual, with any profile of any public figure, if you like the person, that'll be in the pro column of why you like them. If you don't like them, then traditionally that'll be something that you'll add to another reason of a justification of why you don't like that individual.
Okay, thank you. So it's quite a eclectic collection of political parties that are making up the new government. Why does Israel need a unity government now? And isn't it just a matter of time before the coalition sort of collapses under its own internal constraints or contradictions?
I think the major reason why we need this coalition is that this was the only coalition that we could form, as unlikely as it is, to be able to prevent a fifth election. Israel's had 4 elections in the last 2.5 years. This would be already the 5th election in 2.5 years. I don't have to tell anyone in Europe what happens when you have election after election. That's not usually a very good thing in terms of what you look in terms of a country's future. I think today, if you look at the technological information age that we live in, every election campaign has negativity. Of course, there's a negative campaigning, but there's a certain level of us versus them. There is a level of hate that is being, spewed. You have a cancel, society. You have, in many cases, also an incitement, from one side to the next. And after having so many elections, without having that opportunity of, after all the fire goes up, to have time for the flames to go down, to just do election after election after election, it's just, stirring the pot so much that you would expect an explosion. And, another thing of that is, even if we went to a 5th election, the result based on all of the polls is we would be in deadlock again. So, with those questions for our party, we said we either go ahead and do this coalition, which again, it's an unlikely bunch. It's a bunch of parties that have not agreed with each other on many things. But this was the only option that we had in order to stop the 5th election, which most likely would send us to a 6th election and continue down that path of division and hatred and potentially even violence. Now, in terms of the stability of that government, one of the things that we've said, and we've put this in the coalition agreements, is that both sides have veto power. By doing that, you have a situation in which everyone knows that if they try to go beyond the scope of the coalition agreements that we've signed, the other side can stop them in their tracks. So, you might want to try to get a few brownie points, but if you can't get that policy win, that is something that restrains you from being able to even try it. And another thing I'll say here is you have a lot of parties who either they've never been in the coalition before, or they've not been in the coalition in many years, and they want to be able to take home to their constituencies some policy victories. So each one of the 8 parties that make up this coalition, they have policy wins that they got for their constituents in these agreements. And I do not expect that they would try to go ahead and jeopardize the government before they're at least able to go ahead and get a majority, if not all of the things that were agreed upon. Because like I said, for many of these people, this might be a once in a lifetime chance to be part of a government and be able to actually have some sort of policy victories.
Okay, so what are the policy priorities of the new government? What's the government hoping to achieve?
Well, the main thing that we need to do is pass a national budget. We're going to end up voting in the next 6 months on 3 national budgets. This is unusual, and it's never been done before in the history of the globe. We're the only country that did not pass a 2020 budget. And we are the only country so far that has yet to pass a 2021 budget. And of course, we're about to go ahead and jump into the second half of the year. And no one's even started with the first draft of a 2022 budget. So we have a situation in which what we need to do is the basic elementary function of any representative democracy. And that is for the elected people to decide to prioritize how the public funds that everyone pays in taxes need to be distributed. And when it comes to those priorities, there was actually not so many disagreements, because a lot of that is going to be going towards issues of health and education and domestic areas in which there is not really any big disagreement between the various parts of this government. And this is the time I mentioned, the government has right-wing parties and left-wing parties. religious parties and secular parties, Jewish parties, and for the first time, an Arab party. Again, members of Knesset who are native Israelis and those who are immigrants. You have a mix of everybody that's going to be represented in this government, and everyone understands that there's going to be a little bit that each one needs to give that are the priorities of each sector. But what it comes down to is just the ability to pass a national budget. That is the number one priority of domestically in terms of what it is we want to do. And I would say on a national level also, being able to heal those divides, because despite the disagreements, there is here an opportunity because of the diversity within the coalition to be able to find a way to be able to heal a lot of the wounds that have been created since a lot of us have been fighting each other through these 4 elections. For us to be able to heal those wounds and put the country back on a safe track of just back to normalcy and a place where citizens feel that the government is working for them again.
So some of the things that I'm hearing and that people seem to be saying is there's a concern, that this is a left-wing government, that there's going to be the end with a Palestinian state. There's going to be buses operating on Shabbat. Non-kosher food is going to be compulsory in the IDF. You hear all kinds of crazy things. What would you say to the people who are kind of making these arguments that this is a dangerous government?
These are temporary things, because before we get to the vote on Sunday, we're gonna in true transparency release all of the coalition agreements and the coalition guidelines and see what was agreed upon. Until now, you have various leaks, and you have people have different interests to leak previous documents, previous versions of what it was that we agreed upon, or people want to, release a document while omitting certain sections. One of the most important things I would say about the coalition agreements is that the agreement that's signed between Yemina, my party, and Yesh Atid, which is Lapid's party, says that agreement trumps any other agreement that was signed with any other party. So even if someone else says that they're supposed to get something when it comes to issues of religion and state, without our stamp of approval, they're not going to be able to move forward on any of those issues, even if that's written down, just because there's a priority in terms of what is above what in terms of policy. Now, the accusation that it's a left-wing government comes from the fact that the composition of the MKs in the next government is going to be a minority of right-wing MKs. This is compensated by the fact that in the cabinet itself, there will be a majority voting-wise for the right-wing parties. We've created this unique system in which there's going to be a weighting system where the right-wing parties of Yemina and New Hope will have their members have additional voting power when their ministers vote. So instead of a system where people are used to where one vote counts for one, a vote being cast by Yemina or by the New Hope party will be more than one vote when it comes to the tally. And on the other half of the government, which is led by Yair Lapid's array of parties, you have Avigdor Lieberman, who we might disagree on a number of issues, but on national security issues and on economic issues, he is to the right. So that gives us a built-in majority for the right when it comes to the cabinet, to the regular government, the cabinet. And then when it comes to the security cabinet, we also have a built-in majority for the right. Now, the current government that we have is also a unity government, the Netanyahu-Gantz government. What this government actually does is it's more right-wing than the previous government in terms of the government, just because of that right-wing slant you have both on the cabinet and the security cabinet, which deals with the most sensitive issues when it comes to national defense and diplomacy. Now, that's the executive branch of government. When it comes to the legislative branch of government, it's true that the left, if you include the center, of course, when you're mentioning the left, then they do have a majority. The way that I would look at it, though, is to divide it up between the right-wing Knesset members, the center Knesset members, and the left-wing Knesset members. If you divide it into three the way that I did, then you'll see that really it's the center that has a majority when it comes to legislative process. But again, because we have the veto power, we have the ability to stop whatever the center or the left might try to advance that is a departure from the agreements that were signed, and again, will be transparent for the public to follow along with.
So in your mind, there's no danger of, for example, Meretz and Labour going to the Biden administration behind the back of the other coalition parties and actually having a policy implemented, even if they came to some kind of agreement.
They can go ahead and meet with whoever they want. They can discuss whatever it is that they want to discuss. What it comes down to is they will not have the ability to move forward on any of these issues without us.
Okay.
It's just, it's written into the agreements. If they try, there are sanctions that are put on them. Of course, I'm not talking about financial sanctions on their bank accounts, but I'm saying there's political sanctions that are put on them if they decide to work outside of the framework of what was agreed upon. Again, we're in a situation of chaos, of just election after election after an election. And even with the elections aside, if you're looking at the whole Corona situation and the very, very, tough hit that Israel got here, particularly in the second and third waves, we're one of the only countries to get a third wave, and it was very, very hard for us. And then you go from there to Meron, and of course, the tragedy over there. And you go from there to Gaza and the latest round of fighting, and then the issues within the intercities where both Jews and Arabs live. And you just take all of those big events and you throw them on top of all of these elections. And you understand that there is a very, very high intensity environment. And I really do believe that a lot of these people in Meretz and Labor and other parties within this coalition understand what we all need to do is show some restraint, put a lot of the issues that we've worked on that we care about for many years to the side, stuff that we did not agree upon for 73 years. So, we're not going to agree with them for 77 years. We'll have to take some of these issues and put them to the side so we can deal with the most elementary issues. And once we're able to go ahead and do that, we can get back to fighting about the old stuff that we used to fight with back when life was a little bit more simple.
So we can get back to enjoying arguing with each other once life is back to the regular.
I miss the old arguing when things were just a lot more simple. When it was a lot easier to understand and you could have more coherent coalitions. But again, we're just in a place of divide where that's just not possible. 2021 is not 2019 or 2018. We're in a completely different reality. And instead of living in the past, we have to be able to live in the present. And if we don't rise to meet the challenges of the present, then we are just going to completely crash. And it's, the responsibility is all of ours. I'll tell you, just as Meretz and Labor, I might be concerned, you might be concerned that they want to raise certain things. They're concerned that I want to raise certain things, right? Yemina is going to have the Prime Minister's office. We're going to have the Religious Services Ministry. We're going to have the Interior Ministry. We're going to have the Settlements Ministry. We're going to be in a position, in a much stronger position, with larger ministries, with more sensitive ministries, with large budgets here. And we would have let's put it this way, if we get into one of these battles where each one tries to, one up each other in different initiatives, we have a lot more power than they do. If again, you go ahead and you read the full coalition guidelines and the full coalition agreements, as opposed to the various things that have been leaked and the very selective eyes that certain people are trying to have when it comes to what they think is the main parts of what this government is going to be.
So one of the things that I find quite interesting is the inclusion for the first time in Israel's history of an Arab party. And my question to you about this is this in a fulfillment of the Zionist dream to have an Arab party in the government?
I don't know. That's a good question. No one's ever asked me that before. I guess it depends how it is that you would look at Zionism. If you would view Zionism as, the ability to have the Arabs accept the fact that this is a Jewish country. So the fact that you have an Arab party, which again is not Zionist by nature, right, joining what would be to them the Zionist regime and being a part of the government coalition, in many ways you could say that is the fulfillment of the Zionist dream. It's the recognition of Arabs for the first time of the fact that this is a Jewish state, and them deciding to put whatever, ideological differences they have aside to go ahead and be part of the state as it is in practice, as opposed to however it might be within their theology. The other side of that, of course, would be people would say the point of a Jewish state is for it to be a state in which, it's the Jews who are the ones that have the exclusive national rights, and they are the ones that are making all different decisions when it comes to how the state should be run, and that there should not be non-Jewish parties. Again, you can have people who are not Jewish within Jewish parties, but you shouldn't have a party that is not by definition Zionist joining the government. So that would be the second half of that coin. So again, I think the answer to that question really depends on how you would define Zionism.
But do we not have
Zionism? I definitely think that there's a lot to be said about the first of the two different options that I mentioned. And again, as someone who, like I said, in one of the positions that I hold right now within regional government, when I'm in in a vote, and within my voting block is an Arab and a Haredi, to help us be able to promote whatever stuff is in our interest. So what you see now is a continuation of what is happening already now on the regional level and getting upgraded to the national level for the first time, of course.
Okay. So do you think there's a possibility, we're running a bit over time, so I hope you don't mind to stay with us for a little bit longer.
It's all right. I'm okay with that.
Okay, thank you. So do you think there's a chance that the Haredi parties or religious Zionism will join the unity government at some point, in the not too distant future?
I guess I can say I'm hopeful. I was more hopeful before, what happened the last few days. I should point out that we even put clauses within the coalition agreement which would allow for that. And I can tell you from my personal conversations that I've had with people in UTJ, Shas, and the Religious Zionist Party of Smotrich, and I've asked them to come into the coalition. I would feel a lot more better if all of them did. They're making a decision to stick with Netanyahu no matter what, and to go into the opposition with him. I think there are two things that can change. One is if Netanyahu decides to go and someone else replaces him, I think there'll be less of incentive for the other religious parties to stay in the opposition, because the justification of staying with Netanyahu will be gone if Netanyahu is not there. And I think the second thing that's possible is that if they see the sticking power, the staying power of this government, and the fact that this is actually being run smoothly, and once we get to that point, and like I said, you go ahead and you divide, the pie when you're dealing with the taxes, there'll be a complete interest, especially for the ultra-Orthodox population, for their representatives to rejoin the government, to be able to take their piece of the pie. And this is a point to say, if they remain in the opposition, they're going to criticize us and say that their funds are getting cut and so on and so forth. The way it is in every single government around the globe is that the people who get a majority of the funds are the ones who are in the government. They were invited to this government. Bennett sat with Gafni. He sat with Derry. They chose to stick with Netanyahu and go to the opposition. And that's their right. And, when we go ahead and cut their funding, it'll be their right to go ahead and criticize us. But it's not a personal thing. Our preference was for them to be a part of this government with us. And they still have that chance. They have that open door. There is a clause within the coalition agreements. It's a mechanism. I'm not saying it's the easiest thing, but we've created an open door which would allow them, should they choose, to then join the government later on down the road. And I really hope sincerely that they actually do decide to do so. It's in their interest, and it's in the interest of course, their own constituents.
Thank you. We're going to be taking some questions from the audience, but before we do that, I've got one last question, and that's the issue. We touched on it briefly before, the Palestinians and also the diverse nature of the coalition. It seems now that Hamas is emerging as the dominant political force in Palestinian politics. How will the new government be able to deal with that, with its divergent views on the conflict?
Look, we can talk about whether Hamas, is the emerging power and Fatah is the declining, or some of the third-party options that you have there. But that argument aside, you have a reality in which Hamas feels that they got a lot of achievements out of the last round in Gaza, and that's a dangerous thing. And something needs to be done about that. But if they do decide that they are going to push and send us into another round of violence and another operation, I can tell you this, because, again, I'm sitting around the table. We're the party where we hold the prime minister chair. Naftali Bennett has been very clear. He has no problem going to war with Gaza if that's what we have to do, even if that means that it's going to crash the government, because you have to do the right thing. And if that ends up crashing the government, I'll even tell you on a political level, if no one else decides to jump in and save the government, if you will, and allow us to continue, and that's also a possibility, that you could have a split in Likud, or Smotrich might join, or the Haredim, or whatever else. But if we do go to an election, because they decided to bolt the left or the Arab parties decide to bolt the coalition, so we go to a general election with Naftali Bennett as the prime minister. And that is not necessarily the worst thing for us and for our political prospects. So I would suggest to anyone on the left who think that it makes sense for them to put pressure there, I would say, one of my favorite Hebrew words, dafka. Dafka, it would be in our interest to go forward with any Gaza cycle that is necessary, of course, for national security. We're not looking to, create new adventures here. But if it's necessary in terms of national security, there's definitely a situation where there could be political benefit.
Okay, so thank you for joining us. We've got some questions now from our viewers.
Okay.
The first one is Naftali Bennett in favor of the free market, and will there be economic reforms?
Yes, for sure he is. Our party platforms throughout the years have definitely been the most, pro-competition, pro-free market. Again, he's the former economy minister from 2013 to 2015. He has a very good record in terms of cutting regulation, promoting free trade agreements. He is very, very good on these issues. The person who's going to be finance minister in the next government is Lieberman, who is to the right. He's not as far to the right as Bennett is on economic issues, but he's far enough to the right that I think we'll have a lot of cooperation there, and we will be able to move forward on a lot of these issues. It'll be very, very good for trade.
Okay. And just to our viewers, if you've got a question, please put it in the comments, and we'll ask Jeremy either, or you can address it to myself. But any other questions, then we're happy to answer them. So the other question we've got that's coming up, that's not directly as a question, but lots of comments about the proposed agreements with the Ram Party about what's going to be happening in the Negev. So can you just explain a little bit about
I'll touch on that a little bit, and I know this is a boring answer, but all of the full agreements are going to be disclosed. You're going to have a chance to read them. I understand the temptation. I myself have looked at the various things that have come out, the various PDF files, or the copy pastes that people have put out. A lot of this stuff, even by some of the parties, by the way, not just journalists. What matters is the final version that's submitted to the Knesset. And I understand everyone wants to believe everything that's written. I can tell you, someone who's seen the official documents, not everything that is out there in the press is actually correct. Not everything that's been published is 100%. A lot of it is previous versions or sometimes omitting certain paragraphs which are key to understanding the key issue. In terms of the actual content of the Negev, what we're doing there is, number one, taking a lot of the policy decisions that was made by the Netanyahu government and moving forward with them. A lot of the decisions that were made by Netanyahu in the Negev were just never implemented. Our feeling is if Netanyahu thought they were good enough and it was passed during, his cabinet and his government time, that we're just going to go ahead and actually implement that. A good portion of the stuff that Abbas asked for was indeed the implementation of things that were passed. Now, I'm not even talking about promises, stuff that were passed in terms of executive orders or legislation that just never ended up being implemented. So a lot of that stuff, we're just saying that we're going to live up to the word of what the previous government had agreed upon, and we're going to implement it. Another issue is the issue of everyone's talking about the different illegal building and the different settlements and so on and so forth. It was under the Likud terms that you had the formation of certain areas such as Rahat being recognized and then bringing in people into those recognized areas. That's actually within our interest, meaning instead of having things spread out and having these land grabs and people trying to expand the territory as much as possible, you can take existing areas and you can legalize them and you can bring in more of the people into those areas so that it's more concentrated, and that's within our benefit to see those type of arrangements. There are various things that were asked for that, by the way, Netanyahu, who also, of course, negotiated with Abbas, was willing to do that we were not willing to do. One of those examples is, for people who are aware, the Keren Kayemet L'Israel, the Jewish National Fund, works very hard in the Negev to create facts on the ground by building, planting trees. And that stops a lot of the land grab issues that we've had, because they're not going to just go ahead and just plow down a forest. So one of the things that they asked was to stop planting trees in the Negev. Bibi was willing to do that. We're not willing to do that. That's something that's not in the coalition agreements, for instance. You'll see that stuff when that comes out, that we've made sure to maintain a lot of those mechanisms. There are certain things that need to be reformed. There are certain pieces of legislation where, we might not eliminate it. We might not allow certain things to pass, but we are going to go ahead and reform it. And we're going to have conversations about how is the best way to go through when it comes to those reforms. And that also goes to the lack of incentive that these parties will have in terms of trying to knock down the government, because it is going to take time to be able to get through a lot of these issues. I'm trying to think what other issues are important when it comes to the Negev, because there's many of them. And again, if I'm forgetting anything, you can look at the final agreements. But the overall situation is that we came from a perspective that said we need to take care of our interests and make sure that we know that the Negev is a safe place, and that we are also able to recognize the fact that there are a lot of Arabs that are living there who built illegally because there were no legal building. As I mentioned before, I'm on the Planning and Building Committee. I can tell you that, for instance, in the Arab village of Abu Ghosh, when we go ahead and legalize new neighborhoods and new buildings, there is a legal route for people to take. And then when people take the illegal route and they decide to build without permits, we then have the moral legitimacy to go in and knock down those buildings, because we're in a situation where there is a legal way to go ahead and do it. So they're also on our side. There does need to be a recognition that, areas that haven't had approval for housing in 30 years, there's an entire generation that, of course, has been born during that time period, that there does need to be some track for legal building. And again, what I think makes most sense from a national security aspect is to continue the Likud policies in these regards, in terms of creating Bedouin cities where, of course, urban life is a lot more concentrated than just, everyone just taking a few, square meters for themselves.
Okay. And we've got one last question from Sam Kaufman, who's watching on Facebook. and this is a question for you, Jeremy. And he asks, how do you view the rise of anti-Semitism in Europe and the US, and how could this new government make a positive impact for Jews living in the diaspora?
Yeah, like I said, we're living in 2021, right? But it's not just here in Israel, it's around the globe. Unfortunately, when we've seen the globe has been in turmoil, there's been this tendency to blame the Jew. So in certain aspects, they're blaming Israel, but in a lot of countries within Europe and a lot of cities within North America, we see the Jews are being targeted. This is unacceptable. The number one thing that we can do, that we expect people to do, and this comes as part of the Jewish ritual of tshuva, of repentance, is to ask these countries to first have what's called hakara, recognition of the fact that there's a problem. With a majority of the countries, I can tell you, and I deal with a lot of diplomatic meetings and I talk with a lot of different leaders, there is a recognition within a lot of these countries that there is a problem. In the countries that there is no recognition, we have to keep working with them so that they recognize there's a problem, because that's the first step. The second, step within the situation of, the ritual of tshuva is charata, having regret. And I think that we did see positive statements, whether it was, from Biden or from Johnson and from other, Macron and other type of leaders, and Merkel, different leaders going ahead and coming up with public statements saying that, not only do they recognize, but they regret what is going on, and that they're calling on, people not to do such things. And that brings us to the third, stage of tshuva, or repentance, of being in the same position and knowing that this time you do the right thing. And that's really going to be the test in terms of combating anti-Semitism. Are we going to see the next time there is a problem, either locally, nationally, or internationally, that the people around them decide to go back to blaming the Jew for all of their problems, or if they're going to be in a situation where they learn from past mistakes and understand that that is not something that they should be doing. And that's really the scale in which you can test how successful you are. Again, number one, you have to work for the countries that have still not recognized that there's a problem, that there is a problem. Second, the countries that have recognized the problem, to make sure that they express regret and have a call to action where they're asking people to do the right thing, and that there is some sort of consequence and justice to those who decide to go through the path and commit anti-Semitic acts. And then the third thing, of course, is to be in a situation where we've seen that there is true repentance, and that we don't see a resurgence the next time there's a problem and they're looking for a new victim.
Okay, thank you so much, Jeremy. It's really been a pleasure to have you on the show, and hopefully we'll be able to have you back at some point in the future to talk about the development.
It was great. You see, we went over time. It was a great conversation. I had a good time. I want to thank you for a great conversation. I'll thank those in the audience who went ahead and asked their questions. And I just want to wish everybody, a great evening, and to say that, even if you might not necessarily look at this government as your ideal government, there are some very, very good people that are going to be a part of this government. And we really believe that this is an opportunity to do good things for the Israeli nation, but also for the Jewish people. And that, of course, includes the diaspora as well.
Thank you. So to our viewers, this is a special edition of Yisrael Live. We're going to be back tomorrow on our regular schedule from 8 p.m. So from me and from Joseph, who's not here this evening, from Jeremy, on your behalf, I'm going to say thank you to our audience as well. And we'll see you next time. Have a good evening.